Generation 9 of Pokemon has seen some of the most historic fall-offs in the franchise's history. Garchomp is no longer ranked in OU, a former competitive mainstay. Tyranitar has been viable in every single generation it's existed in except for Gen 9, where it finally fell off. And even Heatran has fallen off this generation, despite being a competitive mainstay for years. No matter how untouchable a Pokemon seems, they always have the capacity to fade from the spotlight, making way for new top-tier Pokemon to define the generations. Some of these competitive Pokemon fall-offs happened much earlier than Gen 9, and certain Pokemon that we thought would always be viable ended up fizzling out over time. Let's talk about some of these. The fallen heroes of competitive Pokemon. Top-tier choices for multiple generations that ended up falling off. Specifically ones that fell off quite a while ago that aren't talked about too often anymore. Perhaps the most significant example of a fallen hero in competitive history is Starmie. It's been a while since Starmie was competitively viable, so it's easy to forget just how good this Pokemon's career was, but Starmie was introduced in Gen 1, where it was tremendous, and it maintained a status in OU and competitive relevance all the way up until Generation 7, where it finally fell off. That's a pretty impressive resume for a Gen 1 Pokemon. From the beginning, Starmie stood out as an effective special attacker thanks to its high speed and great move pool. Plenty of stab moves like Hydro Pump and Surf at its disposal and later Scald, the Thunderbolt Ice Beam combo, and from Gen 2 onwards it would get Rapid Spin, which is just a lot of useful stuff all in one package. Starmie has access to Recover, Thunder Wave and Toxic, and for a long time, it excelled both offensively and defensively. In Gen 3, Starmie received the ability Natural Cure, which was an excellent addition, allowing Starmie to heal status on switch out. And Gen 3 is perhaps where Starmie feels at its most versatile, with both defensive and offensive sets thriving in this particular format. In Gen 3, 4, and 5, Starmie is known as being an effective special attacker that is not as afraid of Tyranitar as other special attackers because it threatens it so significantly with Stab Hydro Pump. Tyranitar is central in all of these generations and it's pretty effective against special attackers because of its natural bulk, and especially from Gen 4 onwards where rock types gain a special defense boost in the Sandstorm. But Starmie is a rare special attacker that Tyranitar cannot switch in against very safely. I think it's incredibly impressive that even in Gen 6, Starmie ended up ranked in OU, where Psychic types started to feel a lot worse. Psychic types are under serious fire. It's never been great that they're weak to Bug, ever since the introduction of U-Turn to the game, but from Gen 6 onwards, Knockoff is buffed and Ghost types are more common as an offensive type, making it a little bit difficult to exist as a Psychic type. But Starmie managed to cling on to OU viability, still useful for its special attacking capabilities, great move pool, recovery, and access to the ever-coveted Rapid Spin. Starmie also made creative use of the move Reflect type to get the jump on some of its potential counters in Gen 6, like Ferrothorn. Reflect type changes you into the same typing as the enemy, and by changing into Grass Steel type against Ferrothorn, you resist all of their incoming hits. Pretty cool stuff. But Gen 7 is where Starmie would start to feel its age, and faster Pokemon, more threatening Pokemon, and even more effective hazard removers started to come into the mix. Defog was more widespread from Gen 7 onwards, and Starmie's weaknesses to Dark, Bug, and Ghost really started to bring it down. It's also just not quite good enough to only have 100 base special attack from Gen 7 onwards. That's not that hard hitting anymore. For a long time, 100 base special attack was good enough to get by and pose a threat to a lot of things. But in Gen 7, in the more modern world of Gen 7, that was no longer really the case unless you had significant help from other areas. Starmie has never quite reached its old heights, and it's not even in Gen 9, unfortunately, but even if it was, it wouldn't be great. The last generation this was in was Gen 8, where it was ranked all the way down in NU, which is pretty unfortunate to see. But Starmie deserves respect for its long career of excellence. I've always found it to be a good and balanced competitive Pokemon, and an icon of the earlier generations of the game. Up next is Forretress, a modest Pokemon, and a Pokemon you might not think that highly of as a competitive staple or a competitive icon, but Forretress had a great career. This Pokemon was introduced in Gen 2, where it was OU ranked, and very effective in that tier, and it maintained OU status up until Generation 6, so 4 straight generations of OU viability is pretty respectable in my opinion. Forretress is a bug steel type Pokemon, and this is one of the best type combinations in the entire game. Forretress only has a single weakness to fire and so many great resistances, as well as immunity to sandstorm damage and being poisoned as well. Forretress is kind of like a Swiss Army knife of utility, as it has access to both spikes and rapid spin. From Gen 4 onwards, it would even get Stealth Rock and Toxic Spike, so Forretress has all the good entry hazards and hazard removal, all in one. Forretress has also had other good options in its moveset as well to be a little bit more useful than that. Explosion is the big one in Gen 3 and 4, as Explosion is a very high damage attack that can sacrifice yourself for a favorable trade sometimes. In Gen 3, Forretress had some pretty creative moveset options up its sleeve. Hidden Power Bug was nice as a stab attack that hits both of the relevant rapid spinners, those being Claydol and Starmie. It's one of my favorite attacks on it. Earthquake is nice to have, as that can get the jump on an incoming Magneton trying to trap you, or a Magnezone in Gen 4. Zap Cannon is a cool one. Even though this is only 50% accurate, it will paralyze the enemy 100% of the time if it lands, and it's a great way to punish enemy Skarmory or Gengar trying to punish you by taunting you or just trying to rapid spin block in the case of Gengar. And Forretress could take advantage of counter to stomach incoming hits, and with its great natural bulk and good typing, strike back with sometimes lethal force. In Gen 4, Forretress even got the new option of Payback, which is a great dark type attack to punish incoming ghosts. And in Gen 5, Forretress gained access to Volt Switch as a pivoting option, which is also very strong. Forretress is an interesting case, because while it's often good enough for OU status, and it has been in multiple generations, it's never quite at the absolute center of things. It's just a solid guy, a relevant presence in these formats, but never a top tier Pokemon or anything. In Gen 3, it's overshadowed a little bit by Skarmory and Claydol, who do similar things. In Gen 4, it is very good there, but it can sometimes feel a bit slow paced and hard to use. In Gen 5 is where its OU status is perhaps the most fraudulent, but to be honest, recently, Forretress teams have had a bit of a resurgence, especially on Hail, because Forretress actually has the ability Overcoat, allowing it to ignore hail chip damage, which is very good. The Forretress is kind of a good defensive spiker on hail teams that can ignore that ever-present chip damage that hail is often built around. To be honest, you could probably trace Forretress's fall-off from Gen 5 onwards, where Ferrothorn started to really outclass it as the new king in town when it came to hazard setting, with its ability Iron Barbs getting valuable chip damage, and useful options like Knockoff and Thunder Wave, which are more crippling, Leech Seed as well. Ferrothorn was kind of the new superstar of what Forretress once did, as the guy with all the hazards that just tries to get them up while walling things in the short term and going out with honor sometime in the mid game. The Forretress, while it is a bit more of a Swiss Army knife with its access to rapid spin, Ferrothorn ends up fitting better with the pace of most games, since it is doing higher value things and chipping down the enemy or making them scared to even click contact moves, which is also very good. There was also competition from Pokemon like Excadrill, and Excadrill has both Stealth Rock and Rapid Spin as well, and was very popular for that in Gen 6, because it can not only do both of those things, but output some offense too, with its great stab types and a solid speed stat. Forretress was lagging behind a little bit compared to the competition from Gen 5 onwards. It's still a bit distinct in Gen 5, but from Gen 6 and on, it did fall off. But I personally think Forretress did a good job while it had its time in the limelight, and I respect his service, and so should you. Some have told me that I kind of look like Forretress. I would dispute that, but that's besides the point, because Forretress is fantastic. Up next, I think that you could give some respect to Gyarados. Gyarados debuted all the way back in Generation 1. It is an icon of the Pokemon franchise, one of the coolest in the series, visually and in terms of flavor, and also competitively. In the early generations though, Gen 1 and 2, Gyarados was struggling a little bit to find an identity for itself, as it was a pre-physical special split time. There weren't many good flying stab options, so it wasn't hitting very hard. It was often a bit too slow to accomplish much. But that all changed in Generation 3 when Gyarados received the excellent new tool of Dragon Dance, and Gyarados is one of the best physical sweepers in Gen 3. It's a little bit overshadowed by Salamence, who is often superior with its higher speed stat and better physical coverage, but Gyarados sets itself apart in meaningful ways. Gyarados gained the ability Intimidate in Generation 3 as well, which was a significant buff and a great ability. ability that lowers the enemy's attack. Gyarados stands out from Salamence because of its typing. Water Flying means it is neutral to ice and can actually set up against Swampert, who is the main physical check in that format. So Gyarados actually matches up pretty well into Swampert, which is very, very good. Gyarados also has access to some unique utility moves like Taunt to disrupt Skarmory. Gyarados can sometimes even 1v1 Skarmory thanks to Taunt. And Melodic, because they can't poison you or heal. Gyarados has Thunder Wave, which is very, very good. Gyarados is effective at using it because it invites in Pokemon like Zapdos and Gengar who get really punished by paralysis. And Gyarados is just generally pretty nice as a check to fighting types in the tier, and a general useful fellow because of its immunity to spikes and ability to intimidate any physical Pokemon. In Gen 4, Gyarados rose to Superstardom, where it is perhaps the scariest thing in the whole format. Gyarados gained physical stab on the water side now. The physical special split happened, meaning water moves can now be physical, and Gyarados' stab waterfall is incredibly scary. It got good new physical coverage options like Ice Fang as well, and also the all-new Stone Edge. It previously lacked rock coverage, but now it's got all the coverage in the world. Waterfall is also kind of annoying in Gen 4 because it has a 20% flinch chance on it. So even if you live a hit from Gyarados, there's a risk that you just get broken through anyway because of that flinch chance. In Gen 5, Gyarados also held onto OU viability as a fantastic physical threat on rain teams, with rain being permanent and boosting your water type damage, as well as the new ability Moxie in Gen 5, which allows you to ramp up and gain an attack boost every single time you earn a KO. Gyarados was a pretty good late game finisher. You could even run Scarf Gyarados in this gen to take advantage of that and just click Waterfall in the end game, cleaning up everything left. Dragon Dance sets were good too. Gyarados did get a solid Mega Evolution for the Gen 6 and 7 metagames, a pretty nice Stall Breaker Mega Evolution with a Water Dark typing and the ability Mold Breaker to ignore enemy abilities. But Gyarados itself, the base form Gyarados, started to fall off a little bit compared to other physical sweepers. Gyarados did have a little bit of viability again in Gen 7 without its Mega form because of Z moves, and Gyarados could take advantage of Z Flynium to do a big flying type hit with Z Bounce, which was very strong, and that could let its Moxie boosts start ramping. But this Gyarados set was ranked in the UUBL tier in Gen 7, not quite that popular. So Gyarados had a respectable career with viability in Gens 3, 4, and 5. But in modern times, Gyarados is not quite as intimidating as it looks, with its rock weakness catching up to it, the low speed meaning it's less and less effective as a Dragon Dance sweeper over the years. Choice Scarf Pokemon have always been able to offensively check Gyarados, but now even some of the fast Pokemon, just off their base speed alone, are able to outrun a speed boosted Gyarados, which is a little unfortunate. But Gyarados deserves applause for its admirable career, and I think that Gyarados was at its most epic in Gen 3, where it feels quite balanced and it feels like a great addition to the format, in my personal opinion. Gen 4 Gyarados is kind of an evil being. You've all seen that Lavos replay. I mean, he shouldn't have said those things, but that was some nonsense. We can agree on that, wasn't it? Gen 5 Gyarados is cool though. I like Gen 5 Gyarados in the rain teams. Suicune is one of the Gen 2 legendary beasts, and it maintained OU status and competitive relevance in Gens 2, 3, and 4. Pretty cool. Suicune debuted as just a really nice, bulky water type that could rest and sit there forever. In Gen 3, it's not that different. It still does that, but in Gen 3, it received the move Calm Mind, which was a significant buff. It turned Suicune from a good Pokemon to a great Pokemon. This is where the iconic Crocoon set was developed by the player Chromat back in the net battle days. Suicune could simply use Calm Mind, Rest, Sleep Talk, and Surf to constantly boost itself, heal, and click Sleep Talk, allowing it to continue boosting and even attacking during its sleep. Even though Surf is your only attack and that has its drawbacks, this set can be an incredible win condition that is difficult to actually pin down and get rid of because it keeps ramping defensively. And Water type has no physical weaknesses in Gen 3, as its weaknesses are Electric and Grass, so with enough special defense you can just become unkillable. Suicune has a lot of set variety in Gen 3, with sub-Calm Mind sets aiming to beat Blissey, Raw Suicune to try and actually defeat enemy Suicune and get rid of all their boosts so that you can triumph as the superior Suicune. There's that Rest Talk set. There's offensive Suicunes that don't run Rest at all and just go Calm Mind 3 attacks. There's Rain Dance Suicune, which can enable teammates clearing weather as well as boosting your own water type damage. And there's even Salac Berry Suicune for an even further aggressive plan. In Gen 4, Suicune is still clinging on to OU status and is very good in the format. It feels a bit different though, used more for aggression as the premier set became a super Suicune set with Calm Mind and 3 attacks. You do still sometimes see the bulky rest Suicune sets, but the power level of Gen 4 was a significant increase. Now there were physical electric grass moves that could hit Suicune, so it wasn't quite the blob of stats that can never die that it was back in Gen 3. Higher base power neutral moves also punish Suicune a little bit more, as do the increase in entry hazards with Stealth Rock and Toxic Spikes existing. The Suicune is having a little bit tougher of a time in Gen 4. It's not quite the beast it once was, but it's still very good in the OU format. In Gen 5, though, Suicune's one-dimensional nature with its one thing it can do, you know, just Calm Mind, sit there, rest up, attack, started to fall off in how good it was. In Gen 5 OU, Suicune is pretty much never seen. Suicune would prop up sometimes in later gens, like Gen 6 OU, where it saw a bit of a resurgence with its pressure stall sets. Pressure can be a good defensive ability, as it causes the enemy to consume double PP, and with that, Suicune can use a dastardly substitute protect set that just sits there and wastes all of the enemy's PP. It's an absolutely vile thing to do to somebody, but you can do it, and sometimes stall teams do this. I believe this can be done in Generation 8 as well, but Suicune is certainly not as scary as it was in those earlier generations. But I do view Suicune as one of the defining Pokemon of early competitive that did one very simple and very effective thing that ended up being a central concept, especially in Generation 3. Salamence debuted in Generation 3, where it was immediately excellent, and it's pretty obvious to see why. This Pokemon had everything going for it. A great ability in Intimidate, Dragon Flying typing, which is quite good. Incredible stats as well, with that base 100 speed, high special attack and attack, but especially attack, which is base 135, even by modern standards that is quite good. And respectable bulk considering, with pretty high HP of base 95. And Salamence also had an outstanding move pool and set of options. Salamence in Gen 3 is unbelievably versatile, with mixed attacking sets being its most effective, as it's just got such a plethora of coverage options that hit so many of the tier's most popular Pokemon. You've got Fire Blast, hit Starmie, Forretress, etc. HP Grass for Swampert, Dragon Claw for Stab, Brick Break to hit Tyranitar and Blissey. You can also run Hydro Pump to hit Claydol, Midground Tyranitar and hit the fire types, Moltres and Charizard. You've got Rock Slide, which also hits them, Earthquake. Salamence could also run Dragon Dance sets, where it was a team's win condition, with the support of Magneton and wearing down checks like Swampert and Melodic. Over the course of a game, you could sweep and destroy everything with the Dragon Dance Salamence. After just one boost, this is outrunning the entire world, and it has perfect physical coverage almost, with Flying, Ground, and Rock. Salamence could also run a Choice Band for immediate power, or just a Wish defensive set. It could even be a defensive Pokemon. In Gen 4, Salamence was so powerful that it had to be banned outright, as Dragon types got so significantly buffed in this gen that this just became too overwhelming. It gained Outrage, the unbelievably powerful stab attack, with, at the time, nothing that could really come in except Steel types. Even they were taking a hefty hit from it. Draco Meteor had 140 power here, and it was incredible as a mixed attacking option on this. And with, you know, Dragon Dance and this unbelievable move pool and even more items to choose from, like Life Orb for enhanced damage output, Salamence was just absolutely unbelievable in Gen 4. Definitely at the peak of its power. In Gen 5, Salamence dipped a little bit in its power level, but it still clung onto OU viability at the time. Salamence had a bit more competition here, especially from Dragonite, who had the same typing and also now had the ability Multi-Scale, which is much better than Salamence's Intimidate. But Salamence gained the ability Moxie, similar to what Gyarados gained, which allowed Salamence to be a ramping Dragon-type threat with Outrage spam and other good physical coverage, and this still had a place on offensive teams. Salamence also had a bit more competition from other Dragon types like Garchomp and Kyurem Black, but it stood out still in Generation 5 with that unique set of options it had. And in Gen 6, Salamence finally fell down to the UUBL tier. It did have one of the best Mega evolutions in the game, as Mega Salamence is an Ubers level Pokemon, and even up there, it is probably the most popular of the Mega forms. But its good old base form was struggling to keep up with the increasing power level, and also the introduction of Fairy types to the game, which kind of ruined its whole identity of just ignorantly clicking Dragon type moves, didn't it? Salamence struggled here, especially because Garchomp existed, who was just much better overall. Even though Garchomp doesn't have Dragon Dance or Moxie, Garchomp is just way easier to use with its superior defensive typing, its access to hazards, which are good utility, and also higher speed tier, just a bit above base 100. In Gen 7, Salamence, similarly to Gyarados, could take advantage of Z moves for that Moxie ramping. Z Fly was a hard-hitting nuke, but with the influx of fairy types and competition from Dragonite and Garchomp, Salamence became outclassed and irrelevant. I personally love Salamence, especially in Gen 3, where it is, in my opinion, a model of what a good offensive threat should look like, with great set variety, but also targetable weaknesses like a ×4 Ice weakness. And it's easily checked by common physically defensive Pokemon such as Swampert, Starmie, Melodic, Suicune, etc. It's a shame that in the very next generation, Salamence became far too overwhelming, and then the generations afterwards it became outclassed. A little bit of a sad story, but there was a time when Salamence was on top of the world. Up next is Metagross, a Pokemon who had a similar story to Salamence actually. Metagross, another pseudo-legendary and an absolute superstar in its debut game of Gen 3. Metagross is even better than Salamence is in Gen 3, and it's one of the tier's greatest offensive enablers. Steel Psychic typing at the time was really good, so was the ability Clear Body, which made you immune to Intimidate and other such stat stage drop effects. Metagross, in a world that's pretty balanced overall, Metagross has the one move that feels like a modern Pokemon move. Meteor Mash has an incredible 100 power and a 20% chance to raise attack, allowing Metagross to kind of just defy logic sometimes, where it gets attack raises against switch-ins like Starmie and Swampert, and suddenly it's dealing way more damage than it should. And it's especially painful because you can't even intimidate it to lower that damage output. The stats are outstanding on this, with its unbelievable attack and defense, pretty high speed considering as well. And Explosion is the other incredible option on Metagross, allowing it to just trade with things. It can often live hits and just trade with something in a pinch. It usually trades up, and Metagross has vast options with physical coverage like Earthquake and Rock Slide. Special coverage on mixed Metagross sets with its Stab Psychic and random options like Thunder Punch. Can even make pretty good use of Hidden Power Fire as it lures in Pokemon like Starmie and Forretress sometimes. This is definitely the peak of Metagross's power, but in Gen 4, Metagross stayed excellent because of its newfound access to Stealth Rock. Stealth Rock is one of the strongest moves in Pokemon history, and it's the move of Gen 4 OU. Having access to this is a huge benefit, and Metagross is one of the best Stealth Rock setting leads, or just mid-game Stealth Rock setting bulky Pokemon. It is providing a line of defense against all of the newly buffed dragon types in the tier, with its crucial dragon resistance. Metagross can still pose a significant threat with its incredible agility set, boosts speed, and allows it to be a bit of a sweeper. Metagross also has so many new berries to play with in Gen 4, like Oka Berry to halve incoming damage from a fire type attack, or Kustap Berry, as Metagross is naturally bulky enough to live a lot of hits, get that range of the Kustap Berry, and get another surprise hit in. Metagross even has Bullet Punch as a new option for priority stab, and those elemental punches are physical attacks now, so Ice Punch can hit like an incoming Flygon or a Dragonite or something. Metagross is still ranked OU in Gen 5, but I would say that this is kind of a fraudulent ranking that's very outdated. Metagross is not completely terrible here. It could be a decent Stealth Rock lead, but for hyper offense teams, there are better options for that, and Metagross does feel like it is not really providing too much in the Gen 5 metagame, especially compared to other steel types like Ferrothorn especially. Ferrothorn kind of took the jobs of many steel types in Gen 5. Similar story with Forretress. And from Gen 6 onwards, Metagross in its base form would never be as good as it once was, ever again. You did get an excellent Mega form. Mega Metagross is a central presence in Gen 6 OU, and it's banned in Gen 7 actually. But base form Metagross, you can't say the same. Steel Psychic became a much worse typing once they nerfed the Steel type to no longer resist Ghost and Dark. So Ghost and Dark type attacks now hit you super effectively, and those are terrible types to be weak to, as knockoff rose in usage significantly from Gen 6 onwards because of its new buff, and ghost type threats just tend to be good. So Metagross was already struggling with competition from other steel types like Ferrothorn and Excadrill, and even Jirachi in Gen 5, and that was true in Gen 6 as well, and it's been true ever since, as new powerful steel types with all the same things Metagross has mostly, like offensive output or hazards or utility, are just outcompeted. They do what Metagross does better. as someone who mainly plays Gen 3 OU, it's a little bit crazy to see how significantly Metagross has fallen in the modern day, because in Gen 3, this is the scariest thing you can face. In modern times, you're almost relieved if you see this, because it's just simply not that powerful anymore. But these things happen, don't they? Life comes at you fast, and Metagross is feeling less like an advanced supercomputer and more of an ancient relic in the modern times. And finally, we have Snorlax, an icon not just of competitive Pokemon, but the whole franchise. Snorlax is one of the most famous Pokemon in the series, and a mascot of the entire Pokemon universe. This is one of the Pokemon that your grandmother is likely to know the name of, or most likely, perhaps. Snorlax debuted in Gen 1, where it was one of the most powerful Pokemon in the entire world. It's in the big three, an untouchable group of titans. In Gen 2, Snorlax is literally the best Pokemon in the entire game. It's even more powerful than Mewtwo and Ho-Oh and Lugia. Snorlax has just unbelievable stats for these early games, with massive 160 base HP, high attack, great bulk, and in Gen 2 it went to the moon with the addition of leftovers, which heal a percentage of your health, and Snorlax has a lot of health to heal, as well as Curse being introduced to the game, which is perfect for Snorlax, boosting its attack and defense, and lowering speed is nothing on a Pokemon so slow already. Snorlax has incredible physical moves to take advantage of Curse, and with high special defense, boosting your defense is exactly what you want, isn't it? And in Gen 2, Rest and Sleep Talk are at their peak, because Sleep Talk can actually call Rest and allow you to just heal up again. Spamming Rest and Sleep Talk is never better than it was in Gen 2, and Snorlax loves to take a snooze. This is known to be true, so Snorlax is absolutely on top of the world in Gen 2. It's literally so good that if you don't run Snorlax, you are trolling in this generation. You literally need a Snorlax on your team. In Gen 3, it is still good. It's ranked OU, but a lot of stuff is out to get Snorlax in Gen 3. Sandstorm is not something Snorlax likes, because it wants that leftovers apple core. It likes to eat the apple, and the sand prevents it from doing so. It's getting the apple dirty. It doesn't want to eat the sand grains instead of the fruit. That would be bad for its health. Snorlax is stepping on spikes as well. You can stack more spikes. You can prevent leftovers healing. And like Tyranitar is more common and it resists normal and threatens Snorlax a lot. There's fighting types that are actually good now, like Heracross and Breloom. Rest and Sleep Talk aren't that good anymore because Sleep Talk can't call Rest, and Rest actually leaves you quite vulnerable in this format, as the power level is a little bit increased from Gen 2. So if you're sleeping for 2 turns, you can actually get punished for that. What a concept. The Snorlax, it's still really, really strong though. Curse Snorlax can ramp like nothing else in this gen, and with the right support, Snorlax can be an excellent win condition and general defensive wall against a lot of stuff. Snorlax Self-Destruct and Focus Punch are also powerful options that can trade with enemies, or Focus Punch can beat down Skarmory quite well sometimes, or catch a Tyranitar coming in. In Gen 4, Snorlax maintains its OU status, but that power is dwindling, as all the same problems from Gen 3, like vulnerability to sand and chip damage and the passive nature of Rest, are still problems, but it didn't get at so many new tools to keep up, and also the power level overall is increased. Close Combat is a move now, and that just one-shots most Snorlax, so that's no fun. More Pokemon get superpower now, like Breloom, and that's no fun for Snorlax either. Moves just hit harder with higher power, so Snorlax as this neutral defensive blob is just not really doing what it once did to as great of an extent. And in Gen 5, Snorlax would drop off an absolute cliff, and this powerful but passive Pokemon just couldn't quite keep up with modern aggression, as sitting there cursing and resting for a million years is just too many turns to spare in the modern world. And that's been true for quite a while, as well as normal just not being good enough as a defensive typing anymore. Some Pokemon can still defensively ramp, but they usually have some ability that makes them immune to status or other such things, like Magic Bounce Hatterene or something with Calm Mind as an example. Snorlax is kind of just lagging behind the competition in that department, and once the most powerful thing in the entire history of mankind is now just too slow, too passive, and not fast enough to keep up. But if anyone's deserving of a rest, I think it's Snorlax, who came onto the scene with a big splash and now has gone to bed to enjoy his retirement. And I think that that's a beautiful thing. And we can all say that Snorlax is cool and fun, and we like him and we like what he did for us. I think we can all agree on that. So there is my little selection of fallen heroes in competitive Pokemon. Former iconic staples that fell off quite a long time ago, to be honest. Who's your favorite of these? Mine is Salamence, of course. Let me know yours down below in the comments. And thank you for watching as always.